We thank you for making the time to listen to the Digital Workspace Fatigue Too Many Meetings episode number 8, a mini-series from EAQ and Associates presenting Human Capital Intelligence audio podcast to better understand the most effective ways to maximize human capital resources and how an organization can enhance performance, engagement, productivity, and deliver desired outcomes by creating alignment between management and their employees. Welcome to the debate.
Thank you. It is great to be here.
Today, we are examining the profound digital exhaustion that has really come to define the 2026 workplace landscape. We are living inside what researchers are accurately calling the infinite workday. The traditional boundaries of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. have completely dissolved, and what's been left in their wake is this pervasive Zoom gloom and a deeply fragmented professional existence.
It really is a fragmented existence. The sheer volume of digital interaction has fundamentally changed how we operate day to day.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core of our discussion today, which centers on the bridge to the issue, partnering for a fair exchange. Specifically, we are asking if implementing a structural focus exchange, such as mandating meeting-free Fridays, fundamentally resolve this modern productivity crisis, or if it is merely a superficial patch for much deeper systemic disengagement and technological friction. I will argue that the focus exchange is the essential structural bridge required to restore cognitive boundaries and true alignment in our current working environment.
And I will argue that without addressing root disengagement and the catastrophic friction inherent in our current tech stacks, implementing scheduling blackouts simply rearranges the furniture on a sinking ship.
Well, to understand why a structural intervention like the focus exchange is absolutely necessary, we have to look closely at the severity of our current baseline. We are witnessing the normalization of what is called the triple peak day.
Which is a relatively new and frankly disturbing phenomenon in the data.
It is. Historically, a standard worker had 2 peaks of productivity, one mid-morning, before lunch, and one in the afternoon. But now, we're seeing this third peak. What happens is that an employee's prime focus hours, the times of day when they are most cognitively capable of executing complex problem solving, are entirely hijacked by a relentless schedule of virtual coordination. Because their day is consumed by video calls, they are forced to log back on at 10 p.m. just to finish the actual work they were hired to do. That is the third peak, and it's destroying any semblance of balance.
The numbers on that inversion of the workday are pretty alarming.
They are staggering. Teams are currently spending roughly 6 hours a day in virtual meetings. When you subtract that time, along with the inevitable transitional friction of joining and leaving calls, you are leaving only 2 hours, or specifically, a mere 2 hours and 53 minutes for office workers for deep cognitive work. We have reached a point where 57% of our time is spent communicating about work, leaving only 43% for the actual creation of value. I maintain that the focus exchange, which means explicitly trading meeting-free Fridays for comprehensive asynchronous updates, is the only viable mechanism we have to pull our workforce out of a perpetual firefighting mode.
I come at it from a different way. The calendar density you are describing is certainly a reality, but it is a secondary symptom of a much more fundamental collapse. The root problem is not just how many meetings are on the schedule. It is a catastrophic drop in human engagement across the board.
But aren't those two things linked? The meetings cause the drop in engagement?
They are linked, sure, but the meetings aren't the root cause. If we look at the Gallup data, the picture is incredibly bleak. Low employee engagement is currently costing the global economy an estimated $8.9 trillion annually. Only 23% of global employees are actively engaged at work. That means more than 3/4 of the workforce are either passively doing the bare minimum or actively working against their organization's interests.
So you're saying the disengagement precedes the calendar density?
I'm saying that if you take a fundamentally disengaged employee and grant them a Friday afternoon blackout, you do not magically create productivity. You simply create unmonitored idle time. True productivity requires solving the massive systemic inefficiencies that plague our day-to-day operations. Knowledge workers are currently wasting 60% of their time on what we call work about work.
Meaning status updates, tracking down documents, that sort of thing?
Exactly. Finding information, chasing approvals, and managing digital distractions. Giving someone Friday afternoon off from Zoom does not fix the underlying operational rot. If they don't care about the work on Tuesday, clearing their schedule on Friday won't suddenly make them a high performer.
You make a fair point about engagement, but you cannot separate the operational rot, as you call it, from the digital drain that causes it. There is a profound tension here that we have to navigate. Consider the employer's perspective for a moment. From their vantage point, these meetings, as excessive as they are, feel like the only reliable mechanism to maintain alignment and a shared culture in a highly distributed world.
Right. They fear that out of sight means out of mind.
Precisely. There is a very real, justifiable fear that without regular synchronous touchpoints, employees will retreat into isolated silos, losing sight of the broader organizational goals. But then, we contrast that with the employee's perspective, which is defined by sheer, screen-based burnout and ping fatigue. We all know what this feels like. You look at your calendar at 8 a.m., you see a solid wall of blue meeting blocks until 5 p.m., and you realize you aren't going to get a single actual task done until after dinner.
It is an incredibly demoralizing way to start the day.
It is chaos. They are exhausted from staring at a grid of faces. The numbers bear this out perfectly. The average worker is spending 21.5 hours a week in meetings, and 71% of that time is considered entirely unproductive. When an environment becomes that toxic to sustained attention, structural boundaries are mandatory. An individual employee cannot unilaterally decide to decline 20 hours of meetings a week without facing career repercussions. The organization must step in and provide a structural boundary to protect the cognitive resources of its people.
Look, you are entirely correct that the individual cannot fight the system alone. An employee cannot just go rogue and start declining every calendar invite. But you are misdiagnosing the primary source of the cognitive drain. You point to the 21.5 hours of meetings, which is significant, but he completely ignores the micro frictions that are destroying focus during the rest of the week.
What kind of micro frictions are you referring to?
The constant, relentless pings. The data shows that employees are interrupted every 3 minutes and 5 seconds on average. Think about that. Every 3 minutes and 5 seconds, a notification slides across their screen. Furthermore, it takes over 23 minutes to fully regain focus after just one of those interruptions.
That math is devastating. If you're interrupted every 3 minutes and it takes 23 minutes to recover, you literally never reach a state of deep work.
Never. You are perpetually in a state of shallow reaction. You could clear their entire Friday, but if they are still returning to an ecosystem designed to shatter their attention, the gain is negligible. And the distractions aren't just work-related either. Look at the telemetry data. YouTube is the #1 workplace distraction globally. On top of that, we have the self-inflicted wounds of our enterprise software.
The tool sprawl.
The tool sprawl is out of control. The average knowledge worker is toggling between 9 to 12 different applications daily just to execute basic functions. A meeting-free Friday simply does not stop the 200 daily digital interruptions, nor does it alleviate the profound cognitive tax of that constant context switching. You are treating a gaping wound with a localized bandage.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. We cannot allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Yes, the technological ecosystem is deeply flawed, and the context switching is a massive issue. But we have to start by building a bridge between management and employees using tangible, structural compromises.
But why start with the calendar instead of the technology?
Because the calendar is where the pain is most acutely felt, and it's where trust is broken. This brings us directly to the integration of the Human Capital Intelligence Framework. Ernest Goss, a HR practitioner, has worked with frontline employees, organized labor, managers, and executive leadership teams focused on outcomes for organizations. What practitioners working on the ground understand is that you cannot simply mandate engagement or wish away technological friction. You have to institute a structural mechanism that demonstrates a mutual respect for time.
A behavioral intervention, essentially.
Exactly. The focus exchange is exactly that. It is a negotiated settlement. The employer concedes a live meeting time, granting a sanctuary for focus. In return, the employee commits to delivering asynchronous, comprehensive updates. It is a behavioral intervention designed to rebuild the psychological contract between the worker and the organization. It proves to the employee that the organization values their output more than their visible live attendance. We have to start by repairing that trust.
I acknowledge the value of rebuilding that psychological contract. Trust is essential. But we need to look much closer at the methodologies driving actual transformation. You mentioned the Human Capital Intelligence Program, which is highly relevant here. However, Ernest Goss, a human resources practitioner, executive coach, and Six Sigma Black Belt, relies heavily on Six Sigma and data-driven architecture to solve complex organizational problems.
Right, which involves rigorous process improvement.
Exactly. And from a strictly data-driven Six Sigma perspective, a blackout period is a remarkably low-leverage intervention compared to what is currently available. If we are utilizing a true Six Sigma approach, we must focus on high-impact levers to eliminate waste at the source. The most significant lever we have right now is artificial intelligence.
You're suggesting we automate our way out of burnout?
I am suggesting we automate the friction that causes the burnout. The data is clear. AI tools are boosting software coding speed by 25 to 55% and accelerating routine data analysis by 40 to 60%. Employees are currently losing an estimated 50 days a year to menial, repetitive tasks.
50 days, it's essentially 2 entire working months lost to busy work.
It's absurd. Roughly 30% of their time is spent on things no human being should be doing manually in 2026. If we want to genuinely demonstrate respect for an employee's time, as you suggest, we shouldn't just block off their calendar for a few hours on a Friday. We should actively deploy architectural solutions to automate that 30% of menial labor out of existence entirely.
So instead of giving them Friday afternoon to do the menial work uninterrupted, you just eliminate the work?
Precisely. That is how you drive the 14% higher productivity seen in highly engaged teams. You remove the friction systematically. You don't just hide from it for one afternoon a week.
You are framing automation and structural calendar boundaries as mutually exclusive, when in fact, they must be complementary. You can deploy all the AI coding assistants and automated data parsers you want, but if the developer is still neurologically exhausted from constant video calls, their baseline capacity is compromised. An exhausted developer using AI just generates flawed code faster.
That assumes the fatigue is purely from the meetings and not the menial work itself.
The fatigue comes from the sheer performative requirement of constant visibility. The Friday afternoon blackout acts as a psychological sanctuary. It shifts the burden of proof from live synchronous attendance to asynchronous documentation. We cannot ignore the physical and mental toll of this fatigue. The data shows that tired, fatigued workers cost an organization an average of $1,967 per employee annually.
Because of errors, absenteeism, and lowered output.
Exactly. The focus exchange directly combats this by allowing the brain to recover during normal business hours. It says to the employee, use this uninterrupted time to finalize your deliverables, write your status updates, and then log off. It removes the necessity of that triple peak day we discussed earlier. By formalizing this exchange, we attack that $1,967 cost head-on while simultaneously providing the employer with the precise project visibility they need without the performative aspect of a Zoom call.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that the structural location and timing of the work is increasingly irrelevant if the underlying management architecture is broken?
How so?
You are advocating for a temporal boundary Friday afternoon as a sanctuary. But look at the data on distributed work. Hybrid workers are already 33% less likely to quit, and remote workers log 29 more productive minutes a day than their strictly in-office counterparts.
Right, which proves that when you give people autonomy, they perform better.
It proves autonomy works when conditions are right. The primary issue isn't where they work, or even necessarily when they work. The issue is how they are managed. If an organization lacks fundamental role clarity, meaning if employees do not have a crystal clear understanding of what is expected of them, and if there is a massive deficit in manager training, a blackout period is effectively useless.
Because they don't know what to focus on during their focus time.
Precisely. It will simply mask the fact that employees do not know what their organizational goals actually are. You can give a confused, poorly managed employee 5 hours of uninterrupted time on a Friday afternoon, and they will simply spend 5 hours being uninterruptedly confused. Without role clarity and managers who actually know how to evaluate outcome-based performance rather than presence-based performance, the focus exchange is an empty vessel.
I would argue that the focus exchange is exactly what forces that managerial evolution. By removing the crutch of the synchronous meeting, managers are compelled to evaluate outcomes. If a manager can't see their employee on a screen, they have no choice but to look at the work product itself. This brings us directly to the core of what we are trying to achieve with partnering for a fair exchange. Let us synthesize what happens when this bridge is successfully built and managed correctly.
Let's look at the actual returns on both sides of the partnership.
Exactly. When we look at what the employer gains, the shift is profound. First, the employer gains significantly higher quality output because they have finally provided a team with the quiet time genuinely needed to think deeply and solve complex problems, rather than just reacting to pings. Furthermore, the employer gains a team that is actually more aligned. They achieve better contextual integration.
Which basically means everyone actually understands how their specific piece of the puzzle fits into the broader company strategy.
Right. Project status, roadblocks, and strategic alignment become visible through the actual work product and the asynchronous documentation rather than relying on the performative attendance of a calendar invite. It builds an organization that runs on actual deliverables rather than the illusion of busy work.
And from the other side of that partnership, we must rigorously define what the employee gains. Ultimately, they gain the absolute gift of time and the complete removal of the psychological and physiological burnout that stems directly from Zoom and team fatigue.
Getting their evenings back.
Getting their lives back. In a properly executed exchange, the employee gains the ability to shut down their technology at a reasonable hour, perhaps 5 p.m. instead of 10 p.m., they can log off knowing definitively that their focus was protected by the organization. And more importantly, they know that their professional value was proven unequivocally through their results and outcomes, not just their passive attendance in a virtual meeting. When the friction is removed and expectations are clear, the employee regains autonomy over their own cognition.
Thank everyone for joining our 3-part mini-series, Human Capital Intelligence series, presented by EAQ and Associates. We will continue to explore the intersection between business problems, operations, and strategy. HR architect Ernest Gause uses Six Sigma and data-driven architecture to solve complex organizational problems. We invite you to visit their website at eaqassociates.com. Join us for episode number 9. We will be discussing pay envy. I found out what the new hire makes in our next session. Our goal is to equip you with the tools to turn your human capital into a sustainable competitive advantage and build the bridge that sustains a viable organization while creating opportunities for its employees. We'll see you next time.